2005. I'm David Lowance, and we're at the Atlanta History Center as part of the Library of Congress World War II Veterans Project. We're delighted to have with us today Mr. Milton Light, who was born in Philadelphia in 1922, grew up during the Depression. Can tell us what it was like seeing some of the World War I veterans as he was growing up, having to struggle to make ends meet, and why he got interested in joining the military before America was actively involved in the war formally, and what happened to him during those years and after the years in his activity in the Jewish War Veterans League. Mr. Light, we're delighted to have you with us today, and it's an honor and a privilege to be sitting in the same room with you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to give you some input maybe. You could relate it to maybe other stories from other veterans. As you related, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I remember vividly the Depression days. Fortunately, we were not rich, but we always were. We had 3 meals a day. My father had a car. Back then, if you had a car, I guess you were considered well off. He didn't use it much because of the gasoline. Gasoline was 13 cents a gallon, and that was out of sight. that was ridiculous. And if I remember correctly, I didn't smoke there, but I think cigarettes were 10 or 15 cents a pack. So a lot of water has gone under the dam since then. I remember World War I soldiers in their army overcoats selling apples on the corner. I used to pass them, and they had the empty crates from the apples, and they had the apples on top, and they were selling them for 5 and 10 cents a piece. World War I. Construction had completely stopped because we had some friends who were in the construction work, laborers in construction work, and carpenters, electricians were not working. They were the first people who were laid off during the Depression. They were the first people who had no jobs. It was a rough time, and I hope that we never go through anything like that again. I've seen it. We have had some recessions, but no one knows what a depression is like until they've actually lived through one. I went to school in Philadelphia. I went to Frankfurt High School. I graduated. At graduation in 1940, there were already rumblings of trouble in Europe, and I used to keep up pretty good with the news and what was happening, and I knew there was going to be a war. And myself and a few of my friends decided that if we hung around and waited to get drafted, we would probably end up in the infantry. And this is where we didn't want to end up, in the infantry. So myself and a few friends, we enlisted in July of 1940 into the Air Corps then. It wasn't the Air Force, it was the U.S. Air Corps then. And I enlisted for 3 years. And then I was in, a year and a half before war was declared. I was in Newfoundland when war was declared. I'd already been to a gunnery school, I'd been to sheet metal school. I went to all the schools that I could benefit of the U.S. Air Corps. I was determined to get as much further education as I could. As it was, I ended up as Sergeant Major and a First Sergeant, but that was over the years. They wanted volunteers to set up new bases. A base that was already there at Gander, Newfoundland, in preparatory to the air raids that we were going to launch onto Europe and Germany. The idea was the B-17s needed a jump-off place from this side of the ocean to Prestwick, Ireland, is where they landed, and they had to fly those B-17s over all that water. So the jump-off point was going to be Gander Lake, Newfoundland. Gander Lake was originally owned on a Lend-Lease deal by England, and originally built, I think, by Germany. And then the British took it over, and then we had it through the Lend-Lease. Well, we set up a big Air Force station there. We had runways, we had hangars, we built barracks, and this was a big camp. Well, it was, I forget what we even called it. It was just Gander Airfield is what we went by. But we were up there at daylight doing the summer months. We had daylight 24 hours a day. We used to play ball in front of the hangars at 12 o'clock at night. We were out there playing ball.
You went into the military in July of 1940, is that
Right.
correct? So you went to Gander Lake about what time, do you remember?
Well, I was there when war was declared at Pearl Harbor. So I went up in September, I guess, of 41.
Of 41, before the war?
Somewhere, yeah, before the war. Sometime I'd already been to school, 40. I never thought about that. About I don't remember. I'm thinking it was September, October, because the ocean was rough. I know when we went up there, it was cool weather, so it had to be in October, September, October.
Where had you done your training before that? You moved around?
I was at Chinook Air Force Base to Army School. I was at Langley Field, Virginia. I was in. See, you asked me because I don't recall too much. I know Langley Field. The main thing was Langley. I took my basic training at Langley Field, Virginia. Then I was at Chinook Air Force School. And then I was back to Richmond, Virginia. And then Washington, D.C. And finally went over to Newfoundland from Washington State. No, that wasn't when I went to Hawaii. We went to New York. We embarked from New York.
Went to New York, okay.
New York Port of Embarkation. We spent about a week up there.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to.
You know, when you gotta forgive me when you get to my age. I do remember going to up the North Atlantic in one of those Liberty ships, and that boat was rocking from side to side, and even the sailors were sick. And I'll never forget the Navy men putting the ketchup all over their eggs, and when that boat shifted, there was a sailor in whites at the end of the table, and all of it just went down the table, ketchup, eggs, everything on the sailor's lap. That I remember.
Was it cold at Gander Lake?
It was cold, but it was a dry cold.
Oh.
In other words, when it got down to into the teens, it wasn't that bad because it was a dry cold. It wasn't a wet, damp cold, and we went around with sweaters and jackets. We had parkas and all that when it got real cold, but I don't think it was unduly cold because I was from the north anyhow. But it never bothered me. It was never that cold. And we had some mild days. As I say, we played ball. During the summer at 12 o'clock at night, we were playing ball in front of the hangars. But there again, in our barracks window, we could open a window and we cut out a section of the ice, the snow, as a refrigerator. We had our own refrigerator in the barracks through the open window. So it was a dry cold. The weather never bothered us too much, really. Now that I think about it, well, sometimes when it would storm, the planes couldn't take off, but it was ideal. It was ideal for a jump off spot. And we were also attached at that time to the Royal Canadian Air Force. We flew patrol duty. We were not in the war, but there were subs all up around the North Atlantic, all through Nova Scotia, Brunswick, outside of Canada. We had the old the Liberty B-18, Lockheed B-18s in there, I think is what they were flying. And they were not, the Royal Canadian Air Force was great, but they were not trained as far as we had been in the setting of the explosives and the bombs and then the depth charges. So we flew with them, and we helped sink about 3 subs up there they were servicing. They were firing on the ferry boats. They sunk a couple ferry boats, the subs. German subs were right up in there, and after our patrol, and we went on patrol with them, it sort of put an end to it. We helped bomb 3 subs. Of course, the RCAF got all the credit for it, but we were not legitimately in the war yet.
Were you flying in Royal Canadian Air Force planes, or were you flying in American planes under the American?
Both.
Both.
Our plane, we scouted and flew in our plane, and then we had I didn't fly in any of the Canadian planes. Most of mine was all in with the American planes. Then we had a group that, bombing experts that flew with the RCAF. We were attached to their squadrons up there.
Did you personally get to witness the sinking of any German submarine?
Yes, I did.
That must have been
It was wonderful. It was great. And all they could tell us, you don't write home about this.
yeah.
We were not allowed to write home or say anything about it. It was just, another thing in the war, because again, we were not supposed to be in the war, and the senators and all, because that's an old story. And from there I went, finally left there and went to New Hampshire, Maine, was transferred there. I was a first sergeant at that point, and I took some troops to Manchester. I stayed there for a while, and then I went from there to Richmond Air Force Base. And I'm trying to think, from there I went down to the Pacific, to Hawaii. We took trains from Washington D.C. all the way to Seattle, Washington.
Could I go back a second?
Sure.
You were in Newfoundland when Pearl Harbor occurred?
Right, I was in Newfoundland on December the 7th, 1941.
And what was your reaction?
Where in the hell is Pearl Harbor? Never heard of it.
No.
We never heard of it, and everybody around, we had shortwave radios, we had regular radio, we could barely pick it up. But it was, and everybody said, let's go, you know, everybody was ready, because that's the natural reaction. But it was, we couldn't even fly out there, we were snowed in there that December. We had to wait till the weather cleared up, and then we got orders, and I went to as I say, to Richmond. I don't know where, I went to Richmond and to Salt Lake City. You know, it's all,
You went back to the United States.
I went back to the United States. I'm in success. I could sit and think about it, but off the top of my head, no. And then I went to Hawaii. But to get the reaction to Pearl Harbor, everybody up there was ready to go. Everybody was ready to volunteer to go to whoever it was to Pearl Harbor. But that was so fun. Everybody said, they'd never heard of it. We never heard of Pearl Harbor back then. This is 1941.
You were only 19 years old at the time.
I was maybe 20, 18. No, I was about 19. Yeah. 41, 40, yeah. About 19.
So then you came, when did you get to Seattle, Washington? Do you remember roughly what month it was? Was it January, February?
No, we went to Boston, and then went to New Hampshire. And then in turn, I went to Richmond, and then I must have been 22, and we went to Seattle, and that was, in Seattle, we got on these Liberty ships. Well, I'll tell you something about Seattle that I remember. They had a lot of prisoners of war from Italy, and they were allowed free passes to go wherever they wanted to go. We were waiting to go, we were allowed out of our barracks, and it used, that upset us quite a bit, and some of the men dug under the fence and went out on unauthorized leaves. But from there, we didn't know whether we were going to the Pacific, whether we were going to Alaska. They issued us 2 sets of uniforms, summer uniforms and winter uniforms. They were smart, wasn't it? That was really shrewd. So we didn't know where we were going until we got on the ship and we started heading south, and we knew where we were going. The word got out we were going to Hawaii. That was a pretty good trip as compared to the one I went to Newfoundland. That was smooth. That was a smooth trip on the same ships, though, Navy ships. And I spent about 2 years in Hawaii, I would say, to the end of the war.
What was Hickam Field like when you arrived there?
Hickam Field was still recovering from the Pearl Harbor. This is maybe when I hit Hickam Field. It was maybe within 6 months after the attack. 6 to 8 months, I'd say. They were still bulldozing the planes. What was left of the planes, they were still bulldozing the planes off the runways right into the ocean. And you could still see the remains of the bombings at Pearl Harbor, the ships in the bay. It was awful. I mean, but by the time I got there, it was cleaned up pretty good. There were bullets in the barracks where they had strafed the barracks. But it was pretty well organized when we got there. They didn't have many planes, but had some old P-40s that had there and a few old bombers.
Was there still much wreckage in the harbor at Pearl Harbor when you got there?
There was still wreckage. Plus, they were dumping. They were, as I said, they were bulldozing all the wreckage that was left on land right into Pearl Harbor.
Do you recall the Battle of Midway had occurred in June of '42 when you got there?
All I can recall is just what I read in the papers. I mean,
You didn't realize the importance of the
Right.
Battle of Midway at the time.
Nobody did at the time. It was another battle.
Yeah.
At that time, there were battles going all up and down the Pacific, and then down under. This was the problem too in the Philippines, and it was going on all over. You couldn't. I mean, back then, the whole paper was full of whatever news they could get in pictures. That's all you could do was read about the war. I mean, it was like reading about the hurricane right now. I mean, it was day in, day out. It was, and we had food though. I'll say this. I mean, the people at home sacrificed. They didn't have butter. They didn't have steaks. They didn't have bacon and all that. We ate fine. I mean, especially in the Air Force. I mean, we had plenty of everything. There was never a shortage. The whole time I was in the service, I never had a shortage of food. So I guess that's why we had it, because the people at home didn't have it. We had gasoline. We had ration books. They issued us ration books to the ones that had cars. I did not have a car. When I was in Richmond, Virginia, I had a car, and we had, and all the servicemen at the Richmond Air Force Base, when they were transferred, they had to turn in their ration books. They had cars, so I had a whole glove compartment full of ration books. I never had any trouble with gas.
What was your job at Hickam Field?
I was a group sergeant major, and I had a lot to do with transfers in and out and general administrative work.
Did you fly any combat missions out of?
That was the end of my mission in combat. I stuck to administrative, and for the rest of my tour in the Army, that's mostly what I did.
What was life like in Hawaii at the time you were there?
Life went on. We went into town, and I have to remark, while I was in Hawaii, they wanted volunteers to unload the ship with supplies, and they were paying us at that time $5 an hour. Now, back in those days, that was big money, $5 an hour. I don't know. And they would pay us. We'd work 7, 8, 9 hours a night when we're off, and we get checks of $40 or $50. I mean, this was our pay back then. A private's pay back then was still only $21. So we get these checks about once a week or twice a week at night on our off time. We'd go down there and work side by side with the Filipinos, loading, unloading, ranked them in anything. Then you got down and loaded it. That was one experience that I had. And Schofield Barracks, that's where they first attacked and strafed. That was still in shambles when I was there. I was there for about a week before I went to Hickam Field. When we first got to the island, we had to process through Schofield Barracks, and that was a mud hole. And that's where they strafed the troops there. And then I went to Hickam and saw all that. It was a mess, but it got cleaned up. Everything. It took 6 months. The Army finally got their act together, and it was a playground. Hawaii was a playground. Before the war, it was, of course, I can't say too much about that. They had houses of ill repute at that time that were sanctioned by the Navy. They were inspected by the Navy in downtown Oahu. Yeah. And you could see the sailors on payday lined up outside these houses, and they were inspected by Navy doctors. Everything was on the okay. That's for servicemen, and I don't believe a lot of people know about that either.
I think probably a lot of people know about it, but they don't talk about it
They don't
that
talk
much.
about it.
That's probably what the case is. So you were in Hawaii for how many years? 2 years? You got there in 1942?
45, I was there almost 3 years, maybe
To the end of the war.
To the end of the war.
Did you leave Hawaii to come back to the States during that time?
No.
You stayed there
I was there the whole time.
the whole 3 years?
Never took a leave, never, I wasn't married, I was single, I had my parents and all. I mean, we corresponded and talked, but I never, it wasn't easy to come back and forth from there. That was the whole thing. Most of the planes were coming in, were going the other direction. You very seldom, if there were planes, we could hop a ride a lot of times. but there was never that many planes going back. Maybe for supplies once in a while, but I never did. I never get back. I stayed there the whole time, and I went back when I got my points. We had the point system.
Yeah.
I went back on a battleship on the USS Maryland, and they got us a ride. This was in October. Must have been in September, October of '45, and then we slept up on the deck. I mean, they had a whole all the points. The guys had points, which was I think I had at that time about as many points as anybody because of the service.
Sure.
And we got back. We went to California, and then we went to Pennsylvania, and finally got discharged and got our ruptured duck. I don't even know where mine is. That's a collection now, that ruptured duck. I guess those are you know, the discharge buttons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure if anybody has them, they're collectibles.
Did you get to visit the other islands when you were in Hawaii?
Saipan,
Or
Hilo.
Hilo?
Went to Hilo. There's where we took our rest and recreation R&R.
Mm-hmm.
Was in Hilo. I flew to Saipan and Guam on helping out on taking supplies down. We used to volunteer for different runs
So,
because you had nothing to do when you're off time. You know what I mean? You're off.
was this after the islands had been secured, Saipan and
Yes,
Guam?
this was after they were secure.
Okay. They reopened the bases there so that you all could fly in and out.
And I saw I saw the plane come through with the atom bomb on it. We didn't know it at the time.
Was that right?
But it came through Hickam. Yeah, it stopped at Hickam, and then went on down to I think Saipan is where they finally flew. They flew from Saipan, I think.
I can't remember.
And Doolittle's, all his B-25s, all that raid, that overland raid. That was a great feather in the cap for the Air Force.
You were still in Newfoundland when that raid took place, I think.
Yep.
But you all heard about it up there?
Yeah, we had radio going all the time. The shortwave, or you couldn't back then. The radios, we couldn't get too much on regular radios. We were Gander was up in the middle of Newfoundland. I mean, we were away from everything. St. John's was a good I think about 6 or 8 hours. I don't know that this is. I guess it was 6 or 8 hours away. That was your main city, St. John's. I mean, we used to get leaves to go in there. That was a real little fishing village. That was dated. You were back a century almost.
Yeah.
And I understand it hadn't changed that much now when you go up there.
I'm sure it hasn't. What was your reaction to the atom bomb when you heard it had been dropped? First off, did you understand what an atom bomb was at the time?
Not particularly, no. We knew it. This was it. It was over. We knew it.
Yeah.
We were jumping up and down with joy because we didn't realize what the results were being. But all we knew was it was ended. That's when we were getting ready to go home then. We knew when that dropped, that was the end of the war. That was it.
Were there any Japanese held in Hawaii when you were there that you were aware of?
No, they probably had them in concentration camps down there.
Yeah.
There was a lot of Hawaiians and a lot of Chinese and a lot of loyal Japanese, but I think at that time, you know, if you even looked like you were Japanese, you were an enemy. It was as I read afterwards and we saw, they were treated, a lot of them, very unfairly. I mean, a lot, especially in California, in San Francisco, where they were American citizens, a lot of them born and raised in this country. We had a whole squadron of infantry of Japanese volunteers, which they acted themselves. I mean, they made a name for themselves.
They did.
And then we had the 99 Pursuit Squadron. I knew about them. That was the Black Air Force. They did a hell of a job.
Yeah.
And I still hear about them. I see something written about them.
You came back on the USS Maryland. When did you get back? Did you come back to San Francisco?
Came back to San Francisco, and I'll say we came to Pittsburgh, California. Is there a Pittsburgh? I think it was Pittsburgh, California. And then we flew to nearest where we were inducted, and I was in Philadelphia, and I went to Reading, Pennsylvania. That was the closest separation point. I was only out in California. Maybe we were there for a couple of days, and they flew us right into. I flew to Reading, Pennsylvania.
When did you get out?
October, I think October the 15th.
So you got back. You got out pretty early after the war ended.
I mean,
Yeah.
They ran. I was in the first group or second group, after the war, after the atom bomb dropped.
And how did you get to Atlanta? What
Bus.
brought you down here?
My sister, my older sister at that time, married someone from Atlanta, and I thought, well, I'll come down to visit her. And I fell in love with Atlanta because I was from a big city. I was with all that, and Atlanta was just laid back. At that time, it was a small country town. The viaduct over Spring Street was the big highway. I mean, Buford Highway is the way into town. That's where you got downtown, Buford Highway. That was the main drag.
And what was your first job in Atlanta?
I was selling fish for Capital Fish Company. I was a salesman for Capital Fish Company. I got a job right away. And then I went into their frozen food department. I worked for them for about 3 or 4 years.
Where was it located?
On Whitehall Street.
Okay.
They are now known as Capital Foods, but back then it was Capital Fish Company. And they were the first ones distributing frozen foods and all. And frozen foods was in its infancy then. People didn't even know what it was. Everybody kept them in the stores. They kept the frozen foods in ice cream boxes, in the ice cream containers, ice cream cabinets.
Yeah.
And then I saw that business grow. I stayed in the frozen food business for a couple of years.
Then what did you do?
So I think I went into the grocery business for a couple of years. And then I sold that and went on the road. I was in the chemical business. I was in the jewelry business with my wife. I was been in and out of business or retail business or direct selling for 20, 30 years. Raised 4 children. And they're all successful now, thank God. They all have families.
You met your wife here in Atlanta?
I met my wife where I was working at Capital Fish Company.
Where was she from?
She was from Atlanta.
You married a Southern girl.
I married a Southern girl.
And she kept you.
And she kept me. Before she died, I think I was married in 48 and she died in 59.
In 59?
Yeah.
That was early. That's...
Young woman. She was a young woman.
And you had 4 children
Fortunate.
during that time.
I never remarried. But they're all grown. They're all from the 40s to the 50s.
So you were in the jewelry business?
Yeah, my wife and I had a place uptown in Peachtree Center. We had 3 places at one time. In fact, this is one of my pieces left from the jewelry business.
Oh, goodness gracious.
And we were very successful. We had 3, and my children helped me with this business. They worked with us, opening different stores. And I had a cookie shop down at Peachtree Center, so I was pretty well involved in downtown Atlanta. I saw downtown Atlanta just grow.
What was the name of your jewelry business?
Louise Light Custom Creations,
Okay.
and then also Grandpa's Cookies. I was Grandpa. Grandpa's Cookies. Before all these cookie places, I had one in Peachtree Center.
All 4 of your children live in the Atlanta area?
Yes.
You're very lucky.
Well, Cummings. My one daughter lives in Cummings, but that's considered the Atlanta area.
That's considered the Atlanta area.
In fact, I set her up in business about 10 years ago in the courier business, and I still go into work 3 days a week, helping her. I drive to Cummings 3 days a week.
So you've been active in the Jewish War Veterans Association.
Yes, I am. We do delve into veterans' problems. We try to help veterans' problems. We do a lot of work at the Veterans Hospital. We hold a bingo once a month. We go to Milledgeville every year with packages for the veterans down there. They have a Veterans Hospital in Milledgeville. This year, we took the veterans from the hospital to a Shrine Circus. We took all the wheelchair veterans from the hospital. We had the VA furnished the special vehicles, and we helped load and unload. And we spent the day at the Shrine Circus, so anything that we can do. And then with the donations and all that we make and the bingo games, we keep pretty active.
Mr. Light, I was thinking of the Adler family who was in the grocery business too, I think, here in Atlanta for a long time. At what point in time did you become aware of the concentration camps and the Holocaust that was going on in Europe. When, do you remember how old you were when you first were in Hawaii at the time when that became?
Well, as the news leaked out, what I read in the newspaper, what I heard, then after the war, then boom, that started. I was not aware of it before, no.
Okay. So it wasn't until later on in the war or afterwards that you
Even though it's coming out now, that the Roosevelt and the people in power then did know about them, and they didn't do anything about them because it wasn't important enough, or it wasn't in the what they had planned for the campaign. They didn't want to. Didn't want to divert the plan that they had. I mean, they were asked. I found out afterwards. The Roosevelt administration was asked to bomb some of the railroad lines and the tracks where they were bringing the Earl into Auschwitz and these different places, and they didn't do a thing. But it's all, you know, there's all kind of stories now, so they have this all on record too. They're interviewing all the refugees, but these stories are all on tape though. There were, I remember when they first freed the prisoners, and I saw the pictures, and I was sick. I wanted to throw up. I mean, the condition that some of these people were in, but they had a hard time. They had a rough time, and they came to America or into Israel, and they started new lives, new wives, new families, and you got to give them a lot of credit. And they are dying out. We got how many? 2,000 veterans dying a day.
too many.
And there's still millions. We still, because the average veteran today is 80 years old. 79, 80 years old.
Sure, that's probably the young side for World War II now. Probably the young side.
So from 1940, well, until they start going in, that's 60, 69, figures 7 years, 69 years, you ought to be 18, 20, hey, that's in the 80s. I'm 83, I was born, and I enlisted at 18.
You actually enlisted very early on considering that the mood of this country when you enlisted was still probably 70% against getting involved in the war in Europe. So you really...
No, there was a lot. There was the younger in my age group. There was it was general knowledge that we were going to war. We were going to be in a war, and that's why you had a lot of enlistments in 40 and 41.
Okay.
Pre-Pearl Harbor, there was a lot of enlistments that I could see.
So you think it was mainly the older generation that was...
It was the older, the conservatives, the isolationists. I mean, if you read the newspaper, you know, there were some politicians. I remember they wanted to make U.S. an island, and we have nothing to do with what goes on in Europe. We got to take care of the United States. We don't care what goes on over there.
Yeah.
Same thing now. You got the same thing now. You have people who don't want to get involved. Let's not get involved, you know.
How do you feel about the mood of the country and the state of the country now compared to where it was in 1940, 41?
It's a different feeling. We were hit on our homeland. I mean, we were coming out of a depression, and we took a personal punch. Well, we did in 9/11 too. I mean, but there was a different feeling. I don't know. It was a complete united, universal feeling after December 7th, after Pearl Harbor. Everybody wanted everybody was ready to go to war at that point.
What were your feelings about the country during the Vietnam War? Do you remember how you felt during the Vietnam War when the protests
No, I
were
saw
going?
a lot of antagonism. I saw a lot of anti-war people. There was quite a bit of anti-war feelings. I remember that, and I remember reading about it. I never formed an opinion at that time, but I do now. I mean, you know, you can look back and say what should have been or what shouldn't have. But at that time, I had my boys were all babies, actually. They were at that time. And I had no axe to grind. I thought it was a bad move at that time. But I wasn't outspoken or anything about it. It was afterwards, though, I formed opinions and things about it that, I'm not going to compare it to the war we're in now with Iraq. I think it's two different things. it's a hard war we're fighting now. I don't see how we can ever win the war in Iraq. We demolished Germany, yet we built it back up into a country. We demolished Japan, and we brought them back. I didn't know until the other day that I read we still have 50,000 troops in Japan. And they don't want us to, the premier doesn't want them to leave. They want to keep them, the 50,000 troops. I guess the payroll there helps the country
Probably
too.
good for the economy.
Yeah, the payroll for 50,000 troops probably helped, but I didn't realize that we still have 50,000 troops.
Do you think the United States can afford to be isolationist in today's world?
No, there's no way that we can. We're the saviors of the world. We're the democracy. We're the rich country, regardless of how bad it is. We're still. We come to everybody's aid. I mean, we're the big brother. And I don't think we'll ever be able to be isolationists. We can't because we depend so much on the rest of the world. The rest of the world anyhow, just in trade. We're going to be dependent on China for trade pretty soon.
I think you're right.
But everything is going. You go through Walmart, and I just say Walmart. Everything you pick up is made in China.
Yeah.
I don't care what it is. I'm so surprised when I buy something, and it's killing our economy here, our workforce. And we move. Factories are moving to Mexico, offshore of all these third world countries. I know a lot of factories that moved down there. You got your administrative people moving their offices to India. They're answering phones in India for Americans. I mean, this is going on global.
Yeah.
So there's no way we can be isolationist when we are spread out in industry and manufacturing all over the world.
You seem to maintain, despite your 83 years, the mind of somebody quite a bit younger in terms of its ability to adapt to whatever the situation requires it to adapt to.
I'm thankful for that. I don't know why, and that, like my sister who was 87 last week, like we discussed it, that maybe we had good genes, maybe it's the way we live. Who knows? Who lives or dies? I exercise. I work out a couple times a week. I try to eat good because I got everything wrong with me. I got a pacemaker. I had a 4-way bypass. I got diabetes. I got high cholesterol. What else? And yet I feel fine because I take a handful of pills every morning.
Aren't you glad we've got a pharmaceutical industry in the United States that could develop?
Right, and I get all that through the VA. I'm thankful for the VA.
What lessons do you think you learned in World War II that you would like to impart or tell your children about and grandchildren, that when they look at this tape someday and say, that was my granddaddy? How would you like to be remembered to your children in terms of your war
As
experience?
treating everybody equal. And I try to teach my grandchildren regardless of color, race, creed, money. We are all human beings. We're all born under the same sign. And if anybody is in distress or anybody needs help, don't be ashamed to help them, regardless of I've taught my kids all that. None of my kids. They have black friends. They have Chinese friends. I mean, they all go to college and all, and they learn to adapt with other people. And I think that's the problem. That too many people are in themselves isolationists. That they live in communities or that are bound by fences, and they only know one way to live. They don't want to spread out on no other people. And this is what the Army did. This Army brought, during the war, it brought guys from the mountains, from the rural areas. It's amazing how ignorant some of them were. And they learned. They adapted and they learned. And we learned because we learned their ways. The South, Atlanta was a laughing post when I went in the Army. The South was nothing. Sharecroppers. You know, the people in the North laughed about the South. You couldn't even drive down to Miami. Half it was dirt roads going through to Georgia. And I remember that. I know people used to try to drive down all the way to Miami when I lived in Philadelphia. And half the time they couldn't get gas, and there was dirt roads. And so that's a past image, you know, back from the 40s that I remember. And look what's happened to Atlanta with immigration and everything.
Well, we are most appreciative of what you did for our country.
I thank you. I did what, how many did we have in the Army? 2.5 million, 4 million? I did what many others did. And then many gave their lives to. I was lucky, that's all.
I think your grandchildren someday will be very thankful that they had a grandfather who taught them to be tolerant of everybody.
We'll give them the film. When the kids, hey, when my grandkids keep asking me for interviews, I'll give them the film.
Is there anything else you would like to leave us with?
No, just that people have more patience with other people. Just like driving and on the expressway, people need to have patience. They need to not be in such a hurry, because maybe at one time I was in a hurry. But in these later years of mine, I've learned how to have patience and lay back and accept everything as is.
Well, I think your grandchildren are lucky to have had you as a grandfather, and I'd like
Thank
to
you.
express my sincere appreciation to you for
I
what
have
you
not-
did.
I have 9 of them incidentally.
They're all 9 lucky. Thank you so much, Mr. Light.
You're welcome.